Have you ever felt so exhausted and drained that you're left questioning if you're burning out? Hi, I'm Flic Taylor, and my passion for burnout and self-care came about when I became a mental health writer who'd lost her mental health to extreme burnout. I know, the irony is not lost on me. Join me as I host Everyday Burnout Conversations, the honest podcast that shares the stories of others from all walks of life as they recover from, manage and avoid burnout by prioritising their mental health and well-being. Expect to hear fascinating conversations, plus positive and actionable tips and tricks that can help you make the simple life changes your mental health will thank you for. Episodes will be delightfully wrapped up in some epic truths and great humour. So, enjoy! Today, I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest. It's Penny Wincer. She is a freelance writer, a writing coach, and an author. Her first book, Tender, The Imperfect Art of Caring, is out now and has just been released in paperback. She co-hosts the brilliant podcast, Not Too Busy to Write, and that's with fellow author Ali Miller. And her podcast is it's just one of my favourite podcasts to listen to. It's an absolute joy for busy people, for writers and creatives. And Penny is also an interior and lifestyle photographer. She's a single mum to two gorgeous children when you look at her Instagram feed, and she shares both the joys and the tough times of being a mum and carer to a disabled child. Penny's experienced being a carer in two different ways, and she has a very busy and complicated life at times, which is why I believe we can learn so much from her today. And just you wait, this conversation is going to be a good one, and you'll see why I'm in awe of her writing, her work, her soul, everything. She's incredible. So Penny, welcome.
Oh, that was such a nice introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. And I'm absolutely in awe of your book. It is beautiful. It's a true testament to caring and what it means to be human and all the lessons involved in that, as well as an incredible insight into the life of a carer. And it's blown me away. Like, I literally pore over every single sentence. It's not one you just like flick through. You just take your time and you devour it. It's incredible. Now, I love the dedication that you have.
Oh,
and I know you say, for my mother, Christine Wincer, who wanted me to learn from what she had been through. So I thought it would be a lovely way to start and just say, tell us more about your lovely mum and what she wanted you to know.
Oh, wow. This is really interesting. It's funny. I think for so many women of our generation raising kids, people are really starting to try and learn how to look after themselves, but it's really, really challenging. I think particularly because most of us are working as well as raising kids, but we're under so much pressure societally to raise perfect children, children who achieve, children who are well behaved, who eat right, who always brush their teeth, who are always clean, who do all these things, right?
Yes, yes.
Who do the right amount of activities, but not too many activities, the right amount of, a little bit of free play too, and all these things. I feel like we're under enormous pressure. Yeah. And it's interesting. There are a lot of things that I know that friends of mine and certainly loads of my peers feel incredibly guilty about that I don't. Right. And I think a lot of that is to do with my experience with my mum when I was a teenager and what she went through. My mother was a super mum until I was 11. I mean, super mum. She was all of my childhood friends, their favorite mum. Oh. She was like the best cook. Yeah. Everyone always wanted to come stay at our house. We had an enormous garden, which she cared for beautifully, and a really lovely home. My dad traveled a lot, so she was really in charge of everything. She was a solo mum a lot of the time.
But she thrived on being a mum, didn't she?
She loved being a mum. She absolutely loved being a mum. It was very much a choice that she made. But a few things happened in her life, and I got to 11 and she started getting really severe panic attacks overnight. They just started overnight. And then she sort of battled through that. She had been battling through a few things for the previous few years and sort of putting them aside and not actually really doing anything about them or taking care of herself. And then by the time I was 13, she was in a very, very, very deep depression. And we went through some really bad years, and not all the time, because like a lot of mental illness, it was cyclical. It would go through slightly better phases and then much worse phases. I grew up in Australia, and fortunately my mum had private health insurance. So she did have access to healthcare, so to psychiatric care. And she was in and out of hospital a lot. So it's hard for me to remember back, but I would say between 13 and 15, she was in and out of hospital 3 times a year, possibly for 2 weeks at a time. So it was quite often. And I didn't know this is what I was doing at the time. And I realized many, many, many years later that I was one of her carers. And my parents were divorced by this point, so there was no other adult in the house. My eldest brother was already away, so it was my middle brother and I. And I didn't realize what I was doing was being a carer, which of course, once I heard the term young carer, I think probably for the first time, when I was about 30. And I was like, oh, that makes sense now. Everything makes sense now. And what that looked like for us was, my mum would often not be able to get out of bed for weeks. And so it would be me, first of all, my brother and I taking care of ourselves, but also it went beyond that to making sure my mum ate something and drank some water and showered occasionally, and, coaxing her, encouraging her to go to her doctor and, to go see her psychiatrist and to get outside and get some fresh air and, all of the things that somebody who supports someone with a mental illness needs to do. And I mean, the other thing that was probably a big major part of it for me was that I was her shoulder to cry on. Right. Very much so. So at 13, I was hearing all about everything. Yes. that I probably shouldn't have been hearing to quite the extent that I did at that age. And it wasn't that she had no one else. It's just that I was there every day. And she really did, I think, although she still maintained lots of friendships, she did pull away from them quite a bit, as you do when you're very, very unwell. Yeah. She was very well loved, so she could have, but I know it's incredibly hard for someone who's in a deep depression to reach outwards. And so I provided a lot of that support for her. So yeah, it was really, really challenging times, but it was interesting because my mum was the most kind of emotionally intelligent, articulate woman, and we really talked about it. We talked about when she was going through good phases, we talked about what was happening with her. Right. I understood what was happening. I understood where some things had really gone wrong because she talked it through with me. She never excluded me from it. So she really made me promise when I was a teenager that I wouldn't let it happen to me. And I say that knowing that lots of those things aren't controllable. Some of the things that happen with my mum are out of her control. Probably she was predisposed to it to begin with, but there were also a few things that could have been handled differently along the way. Particularly like medical care has changed quite a lot. This was in the late 80s and the 90s, and her care would be different now. Right. For instance, than it was then. She was put on Xanax when she was having panic attacks. Right. And things that hopefully don't happen automatically now, because it's a highly, highly addictive drug. Hopefully now when people experience the kind of really severe panic attacks she did, which like the really physical ones where you think you're having a heart attack, and she had to go to A&E quite a few times before she understood what was happening and before she had someone else could tell her what was happening. Hopefully now people who present with those kind of symptoms don't automatically get put on opioids, I would hope. Yes. So obviously it's complex what she went through, but she definitely had some regrets about having ignored her own needs for so long to put the needs of the family ahead always. And she loved being a mum, and she was doing what she thought was the right thing. And it turned out that not looking after yourself as a mother is not a good thing to do. Yes. And she regretted it.
And just loves you so much that she was just like, don't do this. Please don't do this. Yeah. Incredible, darling. Yeah. You also dedicate the book to your gorgeous kids, and I mean, I follow you on Instagram and I just adore your pictures, and that Arthur, oh my gosh, he's just gorgeous.
So adorable.
He's so gorgeous. And I've heard you say in other podcasts, by the way, anyone listening, I really highly recommend you go and find other podcasts that Penny has spoken on, because you're oh my gosh, you're an incredible storyteller and you're so honest and open, and it's a real joy to listen.
Kind.
So definitely go and listen to more of Penny. But you've said that Arthur, he's like an opera, and I just think that's fantastic, and I'd love you to tell us more.
He is. It's like it's life in extreme with him. It's extreme joy and extreme distress, and really not that much in between, which is quite exhausting, but never boring. It was really funny because when he was a toddler, he really loved opera, like really bombastic arias. Like the Barber of Seville and all this stuff. And it's like, that makes complete sense, actually, that this child likes opera, because he's so dramatic. He makes dramatic facial expressions. He has dramatic emotions. He changes on like in a second, everything changes. For good and for bad. So he is very joyful. It's funny, like whenever I meet like a new teacher that hasn't spent that much time with him before, and I meet them and they're just like, he's just such a joy. And I'm like, I know. And it's funny because I really don't know a lot about autism in general, I would say. I have quite a few friends with autistic kids. They're all completely different. I don't really know much about autism itself. I know a lot about Arthur, but I sort of forget that a lot of autistic kids are really nothing like him, and he is extremely joyful and exuberant, and that's not the case with a lot of children. He's also extremely challenging and like very stubborn, and so you get the flip side of each and not much in the middle.
Yes, he lives each moment fully, or whatever extreme that will be. Now, I loved in your book, Penny, how you talk about self-care, and it has become a bit of a buzzword, hasn't it? Now, I think we are moving in the right direction. I think the pandemic hopefully is making us look at what's on our plate and kind of reevaluate our lives. But I loved how you really kind of explained about self-care from a carer's perspective. And it's really interesting. I'd love you to talk about that.
Well, it's interesting because I think the thing that I've always found really frustrating about self-care is, first of all, I'm really good at it. I'm great at self-care. I've got self-care down pat, not all the time, but most of the time. A lot of that comes from learning from my mom's experience. I have zero interest in being a martyr, absolutely zero interest. But the thing is, it's not enough. It's not enough. Yeah. There are a lot of things outside of my control, and I have a lot on my plate. Self-care doesn't fix all of that. Yeah. Self-care is great and it's important, but it's not, it gets treated like it's the be all and end all. And it's only one part of a whole swathe of things that need to happen. And also sometimes it's talked about in a slightly narrow way. For instance, I would say my main self-care is work. Yeah. And that's for a number of reasons. Partly it's because I get to have time alone, which is great, and I love it. It's partly because I get to socialize, because when I'm shooting, for instance, I'm working in teams, and so I'm working with other people who are really interesting and really vibrant. And it's partly because the work itself is interesting. I love writing. I'm really lucky that both of the multiple jobs that I do now, I do multiple jobs. They're all interesting, and I find them really like mentally and intellectually stimulating. Yeah. So there's so many reasons, but I mean, also I think for me, the other massive side of self-care is finances, because I'm a single parent and I've always been freelance since I was like 23. I think I've been freelance. I have got to think about my pension, and I've got to think about, obviously keeping a roof over our head and our immediate needs, but also I need to be able to pay for care for my son, because there's, all the baths in the world are not going to change the fact I can't care 24/7. Yeah. And so if I can work, I can afford the support that I need, but I need support to be able to work. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing with when you're a carer, which is really a big challenge for a lot of carers. So work for me is really the center of it, because it allows me to fulfill kind of, lots of different things like creativity and purpose, but also solitude, and but then financially as well, which the finances have a knock-on effect on my whole well-being, because
yes.
I couldn't possibly relax if I know I'm not paying anything into a pension.
Yes.
Because, I've got a child who will be dependent forever. And of course, he will, be eligible for all kinds of government support. But, the idea that he would be entirely reliant on that alone without any support from me, without any help from me, is really scary, because it's not very good. And who knows what it's going to be in the future. So it's also, I have to think about his financial future as well as mine.
Yeah.
And so, I think sometimes the conversation around self-care is a bit too narrow. And then there's the flip side of it, which is there are really, really basic self-care needs that we all have, which are just basic human needs that a lot of carers just can't have. They can't have it all the time, like sleep.
Yes.
And I think we have to remember that we need to prioritize it. We have to. So that's the reason why I did put in I ummed and ahed about a self-care chapter in the book. I talked to my editor about whether I could name it something else. And in the end, we realized there's actually no other word that can really describe what I'm talking about. So we'll have to use it. But so on the one hand, I think the conversation isn't quite nuanced enough and needs to include lots of things, and it's a bit narrow. But on the other hand, we do actually need to talk about things like sleep and exercise and things, because they are, I think, the most basic fundamental things we need as humans, other than shelter and food. And we can't survive without them. And there are many people out there trying to survive without enough. If we know as carers just how important they are to our health, our long-term health, and well-being and mental health, then if we have that knowledge, and we really truly believe it, that we believe that we are deserving of it, then we can fight for it. And by fight for it, I mean, argue for extra respite, or negotiate with a partner to be able to take more time away from the home. The sleep thing is a really big thing, because a lot of people need care throughout the night. That's fine. There's nothing you can actually do about that. Some people just have those needs. But what you can do is remove yourself from the situation occasionally. And I spoke to lots of people in the book actually about they have the most creative ways of getting away and getting sleep. And one way that I had it put to me by somebody who said, it was actually who is raising a daughter who's autistic and has epilepsy. And she said it was an adult autistic friend of hers that said to her, it's your duty to make sure there are other people who can support your daughter. It would be unfair of you to be the only one that could care for her. It's so unfair on her, because what if something happens to you? And something will eventually happen to you.
Yeah.
And she's like, you have a duty to have a network of people you can rely on. That means you do have to do the hard thing of asking if you can train someone to help support your child. If you can ask for help, it's actually so important for the people we look after that we learn to ask for help. It's not, we need to get over our egos a little bit. It's really hard, but we do. And it's important for us, and it's important for the people that we care for. And I think a lot of the time it is ego. Not that that's entirely our fault. This is very culturally embedded stuff.
Yes, ingrained patterns.
I'm not blaming anyone.
I think you're right,
find it very hard. I still find it really hard to ask for help. I want to do it all myself all the time.
Absolutely. But also because you kind of did so much yourself from a young age. And those patterns, they run deep, don't they? And it's very difficult to kind of switch from, kind of doing everything to going, okay, I'd like some help now. I find that really difficult.
It's really difficult. And the pandemic, I have to say, it basically proved to me why I hate needing help from anyone, because it all got taken away. Every bit of it. It all got taken away. And I spoke to a lot of carers during those first few weeks, and we all had such a feeling of grief that we let these people and services and communities help us, and then they were all taken away.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying, because you've built your life around support and you don't know how to function without it. And so as support comes back, we're all very nervously taking the support back. I mean, obviously we're all desperate for it, but it's not easy. It's really, really difficult to get your head around this idea that I have to learn to rely on something that I know now for sure it can be taken away.
Yeah.
You know, and that's been one of the really tricky things. And I remember having a big fit about it, like a few weeks into the pandemic, just going, this is why I hate needing help, you know, because I was so angry that I couldn't just do it all myself. Not angry at my son, because again, his needs are very reasonable. They just are what they are. They're fine. It's not, you know, I think, you know, every human has different needs. His just happened to be quite a lot. It's fine. But I can't do it alone, and I get really frustrated at myself for not being able to do it alone, even though logically I know it's not possible. But it's a lot of different feelings going on about that. But yeah, it was really interesting talking from that perspective of like, we do sometimes need to look at it as a duty to the people we care for, to take care of ourselves, but also, and that's how my mum saw it. I think that's how it switched for my mum, which was like, oh, I made a really big mistake here, because now it's true, we all suffered because she suffered. Right. And I blame my mum for that, by the way. It's not my mum's fault. It was a multitude of circumstances that happened, and I certainly don't blame her, but we all suffered because of it. And that's very present with me all the time, this idea that, you know, when I'm having to make difficult choices about, you know, paying for more childcare, or like trying to work out how I'm going to, because I'm changing all my work at the moment because my son's needs have changed quite significantly this past year. And I really am finding it a real challenge to be out of the house. So I'm changing my work around to be much more of the writing, much less of the shooting, which has to be done elsewhere. And all of these things I'm doing because I know that I need to preserve my energy. I know I need to look after myself, because I know the consequences when you don't. And it was really interesting when you contacted me about the podcast, because you said, oh, I want to talk to you about how you've avoided burnout. And I laughed when I heard that.
You're like, Flic, you have no idea.
I'm like, it could be around the corner at any moment. Literally. Because I mean, I feel like I'm constantly making choices to keep myself safe, and I would call it that. I would call it, because, you know, the kind of level of care that I have to give at times is very high. It's very intense sometimes, and I'm on my own a lot of the time, although I do have a boyfriend. He doesn't live with us, but he does spend quite a bit of time here. But ultimately things are on my shoulders most of the time, and obviously sort of ongoing in the future. So I do think it comes down to safety, because what if I do? What if I burn out? I mean, for instance, the other day we had last week we had a holiday here last week, and it was a number of intense public meltdowns, which are very dangerous, like physically very dangerous, because he bolts and runs into the road and stuff. And there was a point at which I thought, I almost fell and twisted my ankle, but I didn't. I stopped myself in time. But like, if I twist my ankle, I can't safely look after my son, because I can't keep him safe. And so it does come down to, with things like self-care and like looking after yourself, it literally comes down to safety. And if something happened to me where I couldn't physically run, for instance, or couldn't physically hold my son in certain situations, I would not be able to leave the house with him. So in terms of like long term, I think very long term about it. So if I put on too much pressure on myself, if I try and do too much with him, or if I take him to situations that aren't safe, and I do too much, if I do more than I can personally manage, and if I don't ask for the help I need and all those things, I risk putting us all in danger. And it's funny, I wrote about this the other day, and a lot of parent carers really said that really resonated, and they said this is the hard thing for other people to understand. Often it's the choice between doing something you know would be good for your child, but preserving enough energy to keep going.
Right.
And you're constantly making the choice between those two things. And that might be just either a trip to the shops or a day out or inviting someone over, or even small things like that can cause huge amounts of stress and things can go wrong. But if your stress levels are quite high all the time anyway, those what to other families might seem like small stress situations or a little bit of a spike in a stressful situation because you're going away or whatever, can really tip you over the edge as a carer.
Yes.
So you're kind of constantly, it's that balance between providing opportunities for your disabled child, but also preserving enough energy, knowing that if you lose all of your energy, then you won't be able to function properly to just get through the day safely with everybody.
Yeah, and I remember reading that simple things like Arthur getting his transport to school, that your morning you knew you had to kind of manage and keep that morning very calm and stick to the structure, because if that kind of went away and kind of triggered Arthur, then they wouldn't take the transport, and then that affects everything. And it's little things like that I don't think a lot of people know. And it's what's so incredible in your book.
Management all the time. And it's what, I guess the best way of describing it is just like quite constant hypervigilance. So I think the easiest way to explain it is like if you know, anyone who's a parent will remember having a fairly young toddler who's just really into exploring, and suddenly you have to just be vigilant everywhere you go, because you don't know, they're going to climb out the stairs, they're going to open that cupboard, they're going to go into those toilets or whatever. And you just have to be really on it all the time, and be quick to kind of jump in when necessary. It's like that just all the time.
Yes.
And because my son is and he's bigger and he's constantly changing as well. So what wasn't a danger 4 years ago is suddenly a danger now, and what used to be a danger a few years ago is like no longer, but it just chops and changes. And so it's also always looking out for what's the next thing that could cause a massive problem or a massive meltdown. And it is like you're kind of constantly problem solving, especially if your child can't communicate very well or can't articulate what it is that's very distressing for them or what causes problems for them. So you're kind of, it is like being in detective mode a lot of the time. And because of that, families end up being very, very isolated, because it's just easier to stay in a safe environment like the house, where even though you do have to be quite on it compared to maybe other families, you know where everything is, you know where the dangers are, it's much easier to respond. You've got your methods that you can use when you're safely in the house, that you know, like your instant calm down things and whatever it is. I'm certainly a lot more relaxed in the house, even though we do have things that happen in the house. When I'm out of the house with Arthur, I am literally on the whole time. I can't, it's hard even to have conversations with people because I've got half of my brain is on him at all times, if not all of it, depending on exactly where we are. So that in itself can be really isolating. But so what ends up happening is people go, I just need to manage my energy, so I've just got to stay home. And it's tricky. It's always that balance between, you know, needing to be out in the world, needing to have contact with other people, wanting your child to access things, but also knowing there's only so much that I can do before I just reach burnout.
Yes.
It takes a lot of energy. And then it might be that things are reasonably intense at home, so it takes longer for you to recover from an incident than maybe in a typical family where you can really relax at home.
Yes.
So, it's a lot of trying to balance everybody's needs.
Yeah.
It's like parenthood, but just extreme.
And I think you're right. You said at the beginning, like, you know, every family with a neurodiverse who are raised in a neurodiverse family, every family with an autistic child, it's going to be different for everyone. One of my close friends, both of her boys are on the spectrum, and it's really interesting. I really thought of her so much when I was reading your book, Penny. Because it reminded me of some of the conversations we've had about, just kind of general life, and it's such a good book. What I did love is that when your kids would go to school, and it was your work day, you would, if you felt tired, go and have a nap before you started work. And I thought, oh my God, that's bloody brilliant, because I think there are many parents, particularly mums, who would push through. They would think that was almost indulgent. And I loved also how you mentioned that when carers have that respite time, they feel like they should be using it to earn, whereas you will use childcare for rest, which for me was just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
I mean, not just carers, almost every mother I know doesn't allow themselves to do anything except work when they pay for childcare.
Yes.
I think in a way, partly it was my experience with mum for sure, partly because Arthur's needs are quite extreme compared to a typical child. Somehow I've always managed to mentally get my head around that and just be like, well, this is how I function, so that's what I do. I have less childcare now than I did pre-pandemic, just because of various different complicating factors. But I still have sort of just about enough. But one thing I've always done since I've been a single parent, for instance, is that the after school nanny stays late on a Thursday, and I can work a bit later for sure, and I do work a little bit later, but I go out.
Oh, good for you.
Every Thursday, because I just need to know there's one day of the week where I know that I could go to an event if I needed to. I could meet a friend if I needed to. I can spend time with my boyfriend without constant interruption and noise, because that's the thing, is that when I'm at home, it's really hard to socialize with my son. I do, but it's different. And I do invite people into our house, obviously, when it's allowed, which it is again, which is fabulous. Sometimes it doesn't work, but most of the time he's okay with our close friends coming over. But it is different. He constantly checks in with me verbally. He makes a lot of noise. It's great, and I love him, and it's great to be around him a lot, but I do need times where I can have a conversation with someone that isn't with him constantly putting the iPad in front of my face, right up to my nose, showing me something, because he has no concept of not interrupting and all that stuff. So that's kind of a deal breaker for me.
Right.
Obviously, I kind of hate the word deal breaker. That doesn't make much sense. It was all taken away for quite a long time last year, so it's hardly a deal breaker. And so for me, it's a priority. I would say it's a priority. It's not just, I don't just need childcare to work. I need childcare to have a break. And people in relationships, you would have to just negotiate that you both had breaks. Someone else was in the house when the other person was in the house, and that's fine. But because there isn't ever their dad is never in the house at the same time as me, I pay for that. And I decided a long time ago that was worth it, and it keeps me sane. And it's a big part of how I keep sane, just knowing that, okay, on Thursday I can have a break. On Thursday I can see so-and-so. On Thursday I can do this. Yeah.
And that's important to you, because we need to remember as well, and acknowledge, like, you're a creative. So I know you're also a fan of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. And so having those artist dates, having that space for you to just be, allows that creativity, because it was hard to be creative in those very dark days of the pandemic. I think a lot of creatives this is tricky.
I do need headspace to be able to think. And it's really hard to think with a very, very noisy child who always interrupts what you're thinking. So it was intense. But I have always, because I've been freelance for so long, I think what helped was probably that I was doing it as a freelancer before I became a parent. I think partly was because the first sort of 5-6 years of my career, I was a photographer's assistant for fashion photographers, and I traveled extensively during that time. And that meant that I was often working weekends. So I didn't ever really work a structured 9 to 5. I never worked a 9 to 5 ever, but I never worked a Monday to Friday either, particularly, although I had plenty of weeks where I did work Monday to Friday, but it was never strictly that. So I think in a way it's always been normal for me to say work 6 days on the trot and then not work for 3 or 4 days and do other things instead. So I don't have that structure embedded in me. So it's quite normal for me to, on a Tuesday, go off and do something that I want to do, because I don't have an urgent deadline, so I'm just going to do it now. It's okay. I don't care that it's Tuesday. So I have always used the weekdays as well to do other things if necessary. I do spend a lot of time working because I don't really have always have the time that I want to work, and I do like working and I need to earn money, but I'm not, I guess, completely wedded to strict working times. And for instance, like now, my newsletter goes out on a Sunday. I'm only doing them fortnightly, so it's not that big a deal. But I tried for a while doing them like during the week, like having a structured time when I did them during the week. But actually, I really like writing them Sunday morning. So most of the time when someone gets a newsletter from me on a Sunday, at like 10 o'clock, I've written it at 7 o'clock that morning.
Maybe that's why they're so magical. I mean, they're so good, Penny. Maybe that's why. I mean, because
I know what the theme is, and I know in my mind often what I wanted to write about that week, but I haven't written it. I'll just sort of get up and write it that morning. Usually, not always. Sometimes, occasionally, I do it in advance, but most of the time, I've just done it that morning.
Amazing.
And so I might do 2 hours work on a Sunday morning, but just because I feel like it. I don't have to. I could organize my week better and do it if I wanted to, but I realized actually I quite like doing it that way.
And I think that shows through your work. I really do. I'm just listening to this, I'm thinking, gosh, Penny lives her life fully, those moments fully, just like Arthur does. You know, you make the most of every moment, whatever that moment is. You're going to live it fully.
I don't want to give the impression that I'm a super productive person either, because I think that is not true. I think it's sort of easy probably to look from the outside and be like, oh gosh, she just gets so much done. But I really spend lots of time doing not very much as
which
well.
I also think is living fully. I'm learning that in this whole burnout recovery. If you'd asked me that a couple of years ago, I would have gone, huh? Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I understand the importance now of going, I'm tired. I'm going to have a little nap. I never used to nap. Now I do. It's living fully those moments of what your body needs, what you need, because when you have a little nap, then you write masterpieces like this. Like, oh my God, Penny. Like, it's
there was
incredible.
A lot of naps during Tender.
I'm not surprised, because I mean, look at all the flags. and it's just covered in highlighter. It's an incredible book. I wanted to say to everyone listening, like, I really hope they all go and get this book. It's something that I think, you know, all teachers, all healthcare professionals, anyone who has a friend, close family member, you know, who is caring, get this book, like, read it. But it's also for people who just want to explore life lessons in someone else's shoes. I think, honestly, it would be, if everyone could read this book. It's incredible, absolutely incredible, Penny. Like, I'm just in awe of you. It's amazing. It really is. So yes. So I'm curious as to when you did a brilliant episode on your podcast about rest, and you talked a lot about kind of, you know, making sure you got ample time for rest. And I just wonder what kind of things like really give you that blissful state of rest, because we're all different. It's not about reading. Reading
is just like aside from work, I'd say reading is my biggest self-care thing that I do, that makes me feel really rested. And I think partly it's because, especially with novels, you're just in another world. And it's like you have a whole break from that chattery part of your brain, and you're just in another world. So that's one of the reasons why I love it so much, but also because I feel like we just feels so seen in fiction.
Yes.
You know, when you read things that you really connect with emotionally, and you feel, even though you're reading about completely different situations, the emotions are there and you recognize them and you feel really seen. Yes. And so I love that side of reading as well. And so I listen to a lot of audiobooks because it's hard to sit and read when you've got two kids.
Yes.
It's really hard. So for anyone listening going, but how do you have time? So you do have to get quite creative. I love audiobooks. And so I've listened to them for years and years and years, well before Audible even existed and before there were iPhones, because as a photographer, I sit and do a lot of retouching, and it's boring and I hate it. I really hate that side of my job. I can listen to words when I'm retouching because I'm not using a word side of my brain. I can't possibly listen to music with lyrics when I'm writing. I can only listen to music without lyrics. Yeah. But if I'm retouching, I can listen to a book. And so often I bribe myself to sit down and retouch a job so I can hand it over to a client by saying, I can open the book.
If you do this.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. So I've been listening to audio for years for that reason, and also driving to shoots around the country because I do shoot outside of London quite a lot. So I was already accustomed to it, but actually it's brilliant as a parent and a carer. It's brilliant because I put on an audiobook and I cook dinner and I hang out the washing and I fold laundry and, you know, I can tidy up and, you know, you can't do any of that while holding a book. So, so I do love audiobooks, and I do try and read as well, because reading, obviously you have to sit down and not do anything else. So that's also really good for you rather than constantly doing. So I have both, so that I can get times where I'm resting, but also times where I'm just mentally in another place and having a nice little mental holiday, even though I'm physically doing some housework and stuff.
Yes, because you said over the Christmas break, you kind of was like, okay, I'm not going to work. And you just read.
I read like 14 books or something.
Oh, something right. Amazing.
Yeah, and I'm actually going on holiday next week for just a short one. I think it's like 4 days. And I will take a stack of actual books because I don't get as much time to sit and read as I would like. So I will try and avoid using the audio while I'm away, just because I won't be with children, so I will actually have the opportunity to read.
Fantastic.
Wait.
Oh my gosh. And I can't wait, because you're working on some fiction now, aren't you?
I am. Yes, very slowly in the background.
Of course. And it's for you. And it's for you. And I was going to say, like you said in the podcast, like you're writing fiction, but it's purely for you. And it's that joy it gives you, as opposed to it being another thing on the to-do list. Because I think that's one thing when people struggle with self-care, I certainly did, is like 50 things on a to-do list and they're all negative, as opposed to things that bring you joy.
Yeah. And I mean, on that note, I would say I am a big fan of the very tiny to-do list.
Yes.
The very tiny one.
I'm learning
like 3 things in a day. And obviously you might do more, but I'm a big fan of just constantly prioritizing. Yes, I am writing, but it is very much in the background.
It's for you. And anyone listening, like, I urge you to go and read. You've written some incredible articles for the Telegraph. Oh my gosh, they're just brilliant. They really are. I love that picture of you with your kids when they were younger in the Telegraph. Because I was thinking, you're a photographer, so you're taking pictures of the kids. You never get pictures of you with the kids.
I have very few. I've literally a few. And in fact, the one I did something for them the other day, and the picture I sent them, they said, who should we credit? I'm like, my cable release, because I think it was the camera on the tripod.
Yes, fantastic.
So, no, I'm a little bit like a lot of photographers. I'm a bit rubbish at taking pictures of my own.
Yeah, it's a common thread.
Certainly not me. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, Penny, I think so much of what you shared today is really going to resonate with a lot of people. It's like, you're just incredible, and I think your message, and again, like, we've only touched like the teeny tip of the iceberg with the book. Like, there is so so many valuable lessons in here. I just hope people go and get to really enjoy it. Take self-care time and sit and read Penny's book, because it's just absolutely fantastic. It really is.
That's really, really kind.
Now, I've been asking like my guests, because it's interesting, what we all do something different, and I was just wondering if I could ask you some quick fire, light-hearted, thought-provoking questions. So on those dodgy, tough days, you know, when you haven't slept much and it's all busy and whatever, do you have lemon in your water or lemon in gin?
Oh, gin, definitely.
Gin. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
And do you move your body or do you move the remote?
Body.
Get rid of it, that whole cortisol
definitely.
out the system.
Needs to be physical. Yeah.
Yes. You read the Nagoski sisters book, didn't you? You talk about that.
Yes. Oh God, that's such a good book. Yeah.
Yes, and they talk about ending that stress cycle and physically, and it's important. Yeah. Okay. Are you bag of almonds or bag of Maltesers?
Oh, can I have both? I like them both.
Oh,
yeah, have both. Yeah,
have both. Have both.
Yeah.
Oh, this will be interesting. Ask for help or happy to hermit?
I mean, ask for help, but not because I want to or like it.
You much prefer to hermit and get it all sorted.
I would love to hermit, but I know that I can't. And the right thing to do is to ask for help.
I know. I'm learning that too. And lastly, what's the one thing in the name of self-care that you're going to do today that your future self is going to thank you for?
Well, it's Thursday. So I have the evening out. So
where are you going to go, Penny?
So I'm going out for a drink with friends just locally.
Oh, lovely.
I haven't actually done that yet properly. I mean, I've been out for drinks with my boyfriend, and I've been for a drink in a couple of friends' gardens and houses now the last few weeks that we've been allowed to do that. But actually, it was so busy when they opened the pubs here in London. And
was it? Everyone just went quick.
That it was like impossible to get a table. So I think I just sort of put it out of my mind and went to some friends' gardens and stuff. And actually, I realised the other day that we hadn't done that. So I've organised a small group of friends to meet up because the paperback has come out today.
So exciting!
The book came out in lockdown last year. So I was all alone with my children.
Now you can celebrate.
And so we're going to have a drink tonight.
Oh, fantastic.
So there we go.
Well deserved.
That's definitely my self-care of the day.
I love it.
Seeing some friends. Yeah.
I love it. Oh, Penny, thank you so much for your time today. It's been so lovely chatting to you and, talking about your book. And yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Everyday Burnout Conversations. Please check the show notes for any links to items discussed today, and the original music and sound editing is by Chris Taylor. If you've enjoyed this podcast and have a spare few minutes, then it would be absolutely amazing if you could leave me a happy starry rating and review. It really does help this podcast reach a little further, and I'd just love it to land in the lap of those who, like me, last year are perhaps feeling isolated and lonely in their burnout struggle. Please note, this podcast is not intended as medical advice. Remember, you matter, so don't hesitate to reach out to your doctor or mental health professional for support if you're having a rough time. Wishing you a great week and take good care of yourself. Bye for now.